was named Grace because I was born on Thanksgiving Day, but called Gracie Grinkle by Dad.
And Grace is Grace. She embodied grace. She had this way of holding herself, her posture, and she commonly would tell me, "Now, dear, you must enunciate your words." She had a sense of like how you needed to carry yourself both physically and with others.
She personified that she was gracious, she was graceful, she was generous, and she was genuine. And all of that typifies her name, but she carried forward. They had another daughter, which is just for a moment. She was born on Christmas. They named her Carol, Christmas Carol. I always kidded her. I said, "Grace, what if you had an Easter baby? Would you call it Bunny? Would you call it Easter? What would you call it?"
She was the sixth of 11 children, a large family, and by her account, it was an idyllic childhood. She loved all her brothers and sisters.
It was great to grow up in Parowan, a city in Iron County. It was a fairly small town. We knew everybody and we had many friends. When I was born in 1906, we were living in a tiny adobe house. When I was about 7, this little house was replaced by a large 2-story brick home.
She would identify as a country girl. So the house they built, they not only built the house, her father built it, they made the bricks.
It's a little rock church there right across from my grandma's home where she grew up. And it's now a museum.
We had a big garden of vegetables and fruit and did a lot of canning.
How it could seem a bit magical if you're, from, the East Coast, and, the West was, kind of a hypothetical idea.
I loved growing up in a large family. I was fortunate to be the 6th of 11 children, born of very loving parents. Our father, Thomas Davenport Adams, a farmer and rancher who grew up in Parowan, and our mother, Maria Luella Red, worked hard in our home. She was born in New Harmony in Washington County.
They would spend their summers up in the mountains there, up right by Cedar Breaks. They, together with 4 other families, took their wagons and horses or oxen, I'm not sure just which, up, and sheep, and they made butter and cheese. And the cheese was so good it sold as far away as San Francisco. They would picnic up there. They had a great time.
Dad went to town once a week for supplies, which included licorice babies and oranges. After these trips, each child would get a real treat. Half an orange.
But yeah, I think Grace had a distinct pride in being from that small town, again, part of a bigger story. And then the landscape of southern Utah is very different than up in Salt Lake. So that feeling of going up to Cedar Breaks and seeing the natural beauty.
We hiked to the gorgeous Cedar Breaks and picnicked in the lovely woods and meadows. We loved roaming around that lovely place.
Memories that are specifically linked to her, besides visiting, her house in Salt Lake City, would be coming down here to Parowan. That was something I was growing up on the East Coast, and so this was a very different kind of place and very exciting place to come.
After I graduated from Parowan High School, I decided I wanted to go to the University of Utah. To get the money I needed, I stayed home and worked 1 year in the mercantile store, wages $12 a week. I was able to go to the university for the next 3 years before the money ran out. I went to Chicago and stayed a couple of years with my sister Adele to help with her children. I worked in a department store.
And she was a beautiful, beautiful young woman. And I remember her telling me a story of feeling very proud that she had been hallmarked as an excellent saleswoman. She definitely felt a certain pride of being able to do work for herself and to do it in a way that, again, you're presenting yourself well, you're receiving others, there's this lovely exchange. And I think for her, she really always valued that.
Yes, she had many friends and never a shortage of dates. If I look at pictures back then, she was beautiful. She was a beautiful woman.
When I came back, I finished my college life in Cedar City, which was the branch agricultural college at the time, and I had a contract to teach school in the fall. Then my life changed completely. When I was in Cedar City, about to graduate from college, I renewed my acquaintance with a very wonderful man, Obert Clark Tanner. He had been on a mission to Germany with my brother, and my family knew him before I did.
She went on a date with him and wasn't that impressed. He seemed to pay more attention to the missionaries, the returned missionaries. And so she turned him down several times.
He started calling me for dates, and I kept turning him down because I didn't like the way the first date to a missionary reunion had gone. One day I was visiting my mother in Parowan, and my sister Adele called me from Cedar City. She said there was a wire for you, a telegram. It said, "Arriving at 2 o'clock. Meet the train." It was from Obert. He had decided to not take no for an answer and just came down to see me.
Because they were a team. They were a team from the time they first started dating to the times he came down here, and he said he used to go sparking with her on campus where the Adams Theater now sits, where we're sitting right now, because this was pasture grazing land back in the 30s when he would come down here, the 20s and 30s, and see her.
He combined road trips when he would travel to southern Utah from Salt Lake City for business, mostly selling seminary pins to high schools in southern Utah. He would combine those business trips with opportunities to court Grace in Parowan.
They drove up to Cedar Breaks up there on top and walked and talked. And I remember her telling me she shampooed his hair in one of the springs up there. And I thought, wow, it's probably not very ecological, but pretty romantic, I thought.
The result was that he asked me to marry him, and I said yes. We were married on August 5th, 1931.
It was the height of the Depression. And, but this Tanner, he was a go-getter. He came from a very poor family.
She was a very spirited, beautiful young woman with red hair, and that's kind of what her husband Obert, he met her, and that's what he fell for her. Yeah, I think about that kind of her being a spirited girl and young woman, and then who just used that energy through all of the rest of her life.
What she saw in Obert was an expansive future, both intellectually. He was an expansive thinker. He had a bigger view of the world, thanks to his mother, and she was absolutely captivated by that, and just was right there. Like, wherever you're going to go, I'm going to be there with you.
They worked together. It was like pieces of a puzzle. They just fit. Their friends again and again would tell me what a great team, what a great pair they were. So she lent certain strengths to him, and I'm sure he did the same for her. You don't get that a lot. I mean, you meet a beautiful person when you're young, maybe get married, and it takes some doing, it takes some give and take. It takes work to get along, to be happy, to be, fulfilled. But I think they found that fulfillment.
He was able to get a position teaching LDS seminary and continued teaching while going to law school.
And it's very hard to say Obert without saying Grace, because they were a team.
To make some money to help support us, he began making little S pins, which the seminary students bought.
That would drive around in this Model T around the Intermountains West and selling them.
At first, he ran his business out of his mother's basement, but later it grew into a much larger business. He developed a good business, selling class rings and specialty jewelry. He then started a jewelry manufacturing business. In early 1936, he finally finished law school.
He would put himself through the university. I remember cleaning chimneys, among other things. And he would go on to attend Harvard Law School and became a lawyer. He tried one case and decided it was not for him. He didn't want to do that.
He came home one day and said, "I don't want you to be alarmed, but I want to study philosophy." The business was doing well, so he proposed we move to California so that he could study at Stanford. This was quite an undertaking for us at the time. We had our first child, Dean, who was just 3 years old, and another child was on the way. Those were not easy years, because Obert was still running the business while studying at Stanford and Harvard.
We knew, and I can't remember how many times it happened, we knew that there were at least two, maybe more times when Obert, in order to keep the company afloat and to make payroll, or acquire a piece of equipment that was needed, or to take a sales trip to secure a new customer, would pawn Grace's wedding ring in order to raise enough money to meet a financial need in the company. Of course, and then buy it back.
He was determined to build a great company so that we would have the freedom and security to accomplish what we wanted to do in our lives. In 1945, we decided to come back to Salt Lake City. Obert had been offered a position teaching philosophy at the University of Utah. He had a lectureship that permitted him to teach part-time and spend the rest of the time building the business.
He might describe himself, as a teacher and a scholar, almost above being a businessman. That was his real passion.
And then she, loved being Obert's wife. She had that presence of always, like, I am loved, I am adored, I am, Obert's wife, and I'm part of that legacy that he's building.
After Dean and Joan, we had 4 more children: Gordon, Carolyn, Stephen, and David. We lived through 3 great soul-shaking tragedies: by the death of Dean in California in 1943.
Their oldest son, Dean, died of polio. That was quite sudden, and in a pandemic. That was such a shocking event for the whole family.
Stephen in 1949 when he was 6.
Stevie died in a truly horrific car accident. He was run over in a ski resort parking lot. But I think that death was particularly crushing for everybody.
And Gordon in 1955 in an automobile accident.
It was back from a high school graduation event in the canyons.
Of course, this is something that they took with them throughout their lives. I don't think they ever stopped, thinking about that and the loss of their sons. But as I mentioned, Grace was someone she was a very strong person who was determined to move on, to not kind of wear her grief, and to not let it burden her, or not to wear that very publicly.
It seemed like we would just get on our feet and be knocked down again. I don't know how we lived through those sad times, but we had 3 other children who, with their and our sadness, somehow we accepted our losses. We are survivors.
Their response in terms of talking to us about it was always, well, we had to do the best we could for our living children. We had to carry on. We had to do the best we could. At the time when the other 2 deaths had happened, they were more public in Salt Lake. I'm sure there was pressure to sort of carry on, to not fall apart.
One of them said, "We've got to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps for the rest of the kids." And my father buried himself in his work. That was his way of dealing with it. And my mother just soldiered on, I think. She had, good genes, pioneer genes. And what do? You can't give up. I mean, you can, but she certainly didn't.
I can now look back and remember the good times. The boys knew nothing but love and success.
Is how Grace and Obert would often in the evening sit on their back patio and recount their many blessings to each other as they enjoyed the evening. And if you know a little bit more about that family and some of the tragedies that they endured, it's quite inspiring to think of the two of them, enjoying an evening while they count their blessings together.
Cheerfulness was kind of a default manner for her. She was always tried to stay, in a positive frame of mind, and I think that's what that would be your first impression when you met her.
Reading was a big part of our family activity. We read to the children when they were little, and we always gave them books on their birthdays.
All her life, she was a very curious person, and she liked to discover, and she liked to just find out about the things around her, about people. That she was, as I mentioned, a very outgoing person who really liked to get to know people and to get to know something about their lives and kind of what made them tick.
And they had some great friends. Like I said, Eleanor Roosevelt was one of them. Warren Burger used to come and visit our house. Grace valued the education and knew the value of an education. Knowledge is power. It will enrich your life. It has enriched mine. And I got that from my parents. I got that from my mom.
She arranged to go in and observe operations and surgeries. She wanted not just to kind of read about things, but to actually go and see firsthand what that is actually like.
My mother received an honorary doctorate there at Southern Utah University. But she had a nice cape and a colored stole.
But I know that she was incredibly proud to have received that honorary degree. So there was never an agenda about you have to have a certain education degree and that means something, or education is only a means to an end, such as like, I'll get this degree and then have this profession. It was really more a sense of wonder about the world.
I was interested in travel and archaeology at an early age. Later in life, I had a chance to visit many important and interesting archaeological sites around the world.
They traveled to Europe in those years many times, had a lot of friends over there, and went to a lot of plays.
In the last 40 years of Obert's life, we took time to visit interesting places all over the world, seeing great works of art and archaeological sites, a special interest of mine, and seeing great operas and plays, another of my special interests, and just enjoying the people and the atmosphere of countries different from our own. Our first trip to Europe in 1954 will always remain one of my fondest memories. It was the first chance to see places I had only read about before then. Among the many places we went in Europe was Paris and the Louvre, with its many treasures. Obert let me discover the Mona Lisa, and I was so thrilled to come upon it that I nearly wept. The quiet dignity and the serenity of that lady. No wonder Da Vinci loved it.
But for her, again, it wasn't just something she wanted to read about. She would travel and go to places like Greece or Egypt, and she wanted to get out and really climb around in some of the ruins and really see up close what these places were like and what you could learn from looking at the evidence that remained. And for her, knowledge was always a kind of an experiential, firsthand kind of thing that she that was her way of interacting, I think, with the world.
We set up a trip called Following Grace, and that gives students a chance, the opportunity to follow in her footsteps internationally through London and Paris, and kind of get a sense of the places she visited, the places that seemed to mean so much to her.
She would have been thrilled. She would have been thrilled. If she would have been here, she would have taken them.
But I think it's been amazing just to be able to follow in the footsteps of Grace and just be able to kind of experience that, put our feet in her shoes and just take that chance, and just have the chance just to keep living and growing and to have new and incredible experiences here in places that I've never been before.
So there's this photograph of her taken in the 1920s in southern Utah, where she's standing at the foot of the Goblet of Venus, which doesn't exist anymore because vandals came and pushed it over. But in it, she's wearing these little knickers, and she's got, she's out there. I mean, she was the sort of the early archaeology student, this one of marveling at that landscape of the West and seeing what time does. There was moments before she became the wife, sort of the glamorous and supportive wife of Obert. She had that period of time in Chicago, and then those early kind of adventures in Southern California or in Southern Utah.
But there was always a beautiful bouquet of flowers at her place around the boardroom table to greet her when she came to a board meeting that Obert provided.
Back in the day, Fred would always remember her birthday. She loved yellow roses. So he would always make sure that we sent either a bouquet or 24 roses on her birthday. And she was so grateful to think that someone like Fred Adams, who runs the Shakespeare, would remember her birthday. Again, just because of who she was.
As we left, she said, "Drive me home by the big tree." And I thought, oh, I want to get this right. I know where Obert and Grace live, but I don't know which big tree she might be referring to, and I don't want to ask her. I know there's mainly two ways of getting there. I'm going to pick one. I've got a 50-50 chance of getting it right. And I guessed right, and as we drove down the road near their home, she pointed out a big tree, which I think I later learned was a tree that Obert and Grace had planted in memory of somebody very close to them.
Her sense of beauty was maybe even more everyday. If you looked at the pine trees, you wouldn't say wow, those are award-winning pine trees. They didn't have to be the best, but they were her comfort.
My father used to say, goodness, truth, and beauty were his highest ideals.
I was also always interested in theater. I loved being in plays and would take any part I could get. Finally, I got main parts.
She came from a theatrical family, but she saw the value and the internal strength that one can get in the arts, whether it's visual arts, performing arts, music. It enriches you to the point of being a better confident person, a better human, a better one of understanding the human condition. And so she always wanted that to be personified for the betterment of humankind.
You have a sense of craftsmanship. You're growing up in a house with homemade bricks, homemade wood. You're making everything. You're making your dresses. You have this sense of beauty in what it is that you're making.
And she was a joy to be around. Interesting. Never a dull moment. Contribution-wise, she gave of herself, and the financial things when they were able, and they were able. They became very able to do that.
The two of them together really thought about the kinds of gifts they wanted to make and what was important to them and what kinds of values they wanted to support.
And they agreed to invest a substantial amount of money into the cost of this building. Obert and Grace had one request, and this came from Obert, that it be named for his wife's mother and father, Thomas and Luella Adams. And they were from Parowan, Utah. And so it is the Thomas and Luella Adams Memorial Shakespeare Theater. So for 44 years, this theater served us. So this indeed is the iconic building for the Shakespeare Festival. And we asked Obert and Grace if it would be possible, would they be willing to allow us and to help fund a founder's room. We really pleaded, and we had to plead hard. We wanted to name it after Obert. And finally he agreed, but he said, if you do any remembrance or anything, I want Grace involved in that as well. So there's a large portrait in there of Obert and Grace at their home, surrounded by some of Obert's favorite Shakespearean characters.
What he felt that was most important to him in his philanthropic work was beauty. And I think that Grace shared that they funded during the course of their lives, I think almost 40 different fountains in Utah and elsewhere. They found the water and the design of fountains this was a special beauty that combined a kind of design with the natural beauty of water. And so that was something that was a way for them to bring beauty into spaces.
What is most important about this company, at the end of the day, like underneath it all, he really wanted to employ people so they could support their families.
They wanted the company to be not just a place where people worked, but a community where people felt that they were part of a community where people knew them, cared about them, and so that kind of sense of almost making it like a family. We've tried to preserve some of that in our company culture.
I asked them, what are the 5 best companies in the city? And O.C. Tanner was the only one on every list, so that's why I zeroed in. And he was often, I found out, in the building on Saturdays when it was mostly empty, walking through, thinking through ways to make things better, thinking through our processes, especially in the manufacturing area, tinkering with tools and equipment, making plans for improvements. That was a favorite, I think, Saturday pastime for Obert.
We had the opportunity to follow lifelong dreams. Obert traveled worldwide in support of the United Nations, provided lectureships in philosophy.
I think that the idea of creating opportunities for people in education was also something that they thought about quite a lot, and so that's been part of their philanthropic work, both in funding scholarships and in improving access in that way, but also in enhancing the educational experience at institutions. And one of the main ways that they've settled on doing that was through funding of lectureships. And there's one here at Southern Utah University in her name. But this was a way of kind of making, I think the lecture, they'd often thought it was just as a means of bringing knowledge to people.
The Tanner Lectures on Human Values, supported by Obert, have been given at universities in the United States and also in Europe.
Eugene Wolf met with O.C. Tanner, and they talked about the idea of establishing a center in Grace's name. We are celebrating 40 years of having the Grace A. Tanner Center established at Southern Utah University. So on November 30th, which is the day of her birth, we had a day of grace, and we had a panel discussion of people remembering Grace, and we also celebrated with a commemorative pin that was especially designed by the O.C. Tanner Company to commemorate these 40 years of the Year of Grace.
Grace's footprint on this university is enormous. I mean, she's helped fund this theater. They helped do a lot of the beautification projects on this campus. They set up the Tanner Center for Human Values, which still does its Tanner Lectures every single year, and gave numerous scholarships in different programs. So it's very difficult. And then she went to school here. So she has footprints everywhere across this campus.
Her legacy for me was the sense of gratitude. I don't think I've ever heard her complain about anything, ever. Anytime you went to visit her, would be thrilled to see you. She was just really curious, but then she just always had this sense of, aren't we so lucky? Aren't we so fortunate? Aren't we just blessed?
She outlived Obert by, I think, about 12 years.
She had that sense of gratitude and thanksgiving until the very, very end.
This is a woman that deserves to be celebrated. I loved her so much. I tried to speak at her funeral, but nothing but tears. Yep. I miss her dearly.
So our goal is to continue to have her name be prominent and visible here on SUU campus.
She really enjoyed her life, and I think that's what she'd want to pass along.
Down here we call it aloha. It's not just a greeting or a farewell, it's a way of life. And she embodied that. It was a giving, a loving, and understanding. Because there's not enough of that in the world, I don't think. But I think she just made her mind up that she was going to be the best Grace Tanner she could be.
Well, I'm so thankful that because of her and Obert's contributions to this university, we will always remember Grace Tanner.